Chapter 8, Adventures with Electricity. Little Eddie and his brothers loved science. This got them into a world of trouble over the years. Once, Eddie went to a museum where he saw a fascinating piece of equipment called a Jacob's ladder. It resembled an old rabbit ear's antenna with two metal rods projecting out at different angles. A current of electricity was introduced at the bottom, and a spark was generated. The spark would arc between the two rods and slowly climb until it snapped out with a pop. When Eddie got home, he wanted to build his own Jacob's ladder. He ran to his parents' closet and grabbed a metal clothes hanger. Using an old pair of pliers from his dad's toolbox, he managed to untwist the wire and then bend it in the shape of a triangle. It wasn't exactly a Jacob's ladder, but to little Eddie it looked close enough. Just as he was about to insert both ends of the coat hanger into a wall outlet, his dad happened to walk by. Good thing he did. At best, little Eddie would have blown all the fuses and spent the rest of the evening sitting in the dark. At worst, he'd have spent the rest of eternity sitting somewhere else, either heaven or hell. Little Eddie's mom had a big old clothes dryer that sat in the corner of the kitchen. It ran on 220 watts of electricity, enough to kill a full-grown man, not to mention little Eddie. It was a bit cantankerous and would remind you who was boss by giving you a shock when you least expected it. Now, little Eddie's mom also liked to make homemade whole wheat bread from time to time. She'd mix the ingredients in a stainless steel pot, then sift out some flour on the old brown kitchen table and go to kneading. She had this way of furrowing her brow and biting her lower lip when she kneaded that dough. It always gave little Eddie the suspicious feeling she was taking out some of her motherly frustration. Fortunately, it was on the bread instead of him. After she finished kneading, she would hoist the old pot to the top of the refrigerator where it stayed just the right temperature for the dough to rise. The only thing was, with 5 little boys running around the place, intent on killing themselves or someone else, she'd often lose track of the time and forget her rising dough. It was just little Eddie's bad luck that someone had shown him pictures at school from a horror movie called The Blob. This hideous creature from outer space would creep up on unsuspecting victims and suck the life out of them. So what was he to think when he jogged into the kitchen to get a drink and looked up towards the refrigerator? There it was! The Blob! It was crawling over the sides of the pot, sliding down the side of the fridge. It was reaching for him. Without thinking, little Eddie took a step backward, right into the clutches of the electric clothes dryer. There was a blue flash and a smell of ozone. Little Eddie stiffened out like a board. Fortunately, as he toppled over, he fell away from the dryer instead of onto it. If he had, this would be the last story of this book. Little Eddie's parents had reached another anniversary in their marriage and felt they deserved to celebrate. They planned to go off on a hiking trip, alone, for a couple of days. So they hired a teenage girl from the neighborhood to watch the boys. Eddie didn't feel like he could trust his family's safety to one teenage girl. Why, any number of things could happen. Dastardly villains, thieves, robbers, and crooks could be lurking about in the dark right outside the window. So he and his brothers came up with a plan. They found 2 long extension cords and cut an end off each one. Then, carefully twisting the exposed wires from the ends together, they made one long cord. Finally, they plugged the end of of one cord into an outlet and spread the prongs of the other end so that it fit snugly around the metal handle of their aluminum storm door. That ought to take care of any bad guys who wanted to sneak in during the night. One touch on that handle, and a robber would light up like a Christmas tree. But it didn't quite work out like that, though. The prongs of the plug had not made a good contact on the aluminum door handle at first. It wasn't until the babysitter walked into the room to see what the boys were up to that the excitement began. As she approached the door, her foot hit the cord. Immediately, blue and white sparks shot across the room as thick clouds of white smoke billowed upward and fanned across the ceiling. An acrid smell filled the room. Although you couldn't see your hand in front of your face for the smoke, someone had the presence of mind to follow the extension cord back to the outlet and give it a hard pull. The zapping noise quieted down, and the last spark fell to the floor. The boys opened some windows and doors to help clear the smoke out. When at last they could make out some shapes, they saw the figure of the babysitter staring intently at the storm door. The handle had melted almost completely in two and was hanging at a sad angle toward the floor. She didn't speak for the longest time, and when she did, it wasn't to thank the boys for trying to protect her from bad guys. She just shook her head and mumbled, "How am I going to explain this to your parents?"